Welcome to this session on lawyer wellness and mental health. Our speaker today is Don Anthony, who comes all the way from Newfoundland. I got to know Don, and some of you might have met him if you attended Mr. Justice Malloy's swearing-in ceremony, because Don attended and brought greetings from the Law Society of Newfoundland and Labrador when he was the president. Now, a quick introduction and then just a little bit of a reminder of the House rules. If you've got questions, please send them through the chat function. We're going to keep all the mics muted, and then I will get to Don with questions as they come in. Second, there will be time for questions after the session as well. And finally, we are recording this session and we'll be putting it up on the Law Society YouTube channel for those who weren't able to attend today, or if you want to go back and listen to it again. So let me talk a little bit about Don. Don is not a mental health professional, nor does he play one on TV. He's simply a lawyer trying to make it through the day. But Don also happens to have a significant concern for mental health and well-being of legal practitioners in the province. Don's practiced law for the past 20 years, both in private law, public law, corporate, criminal, and regulatory realms as a prosecutor, inquiry counsel, in-house counsel, defense counsel, plaintiff's counsel, and adjudicator. He teaches law courses both at the undergraduate and graduate levels. He's been a bencher of the Law Society of Newfoundland and Labrador from 2011 to 2020 and served as president from 2018 to 2019. And outside of that, Don fills various roles on the Newfoundland and Labrador Pharmacy Board and the Oceans Learning Partnership, and sits on numerous other boards as well. So Don, without anything more, over to you.
Thanks very much, Glenn. I appreciate that. It's a very kind introduction. I will sort of supplement the I am not a mental health professional by saying I really am not a mental health professional. It's this is something that became a matter of interest to me professionally first, personally second, and I became more involved in my role as vice president of the Law Society when you started to have to delve into disciplinary issues, seeing that there weren't always practice problems so much as there were personal problems, perhaps. And we, unlike some other jurisdictions, were poorly suited to deal with those sorts of things. And it struck me that generally this was an issue that wasn't being very clearly examined in our jurisdiction and in some others, frankly. There was a nice coincidence in so much as in 2019, the Federation of Law Societies Conference was held here in St. John's before the world shut down. And the topic was lawyer wellness. And that allowed me to get to know a few people in the area and allowed me to take some further steps in what I've been envisioning. I'm now done with the Law Society. I've served my term as past president. That's done. So all this is on Her Majesty's dime now, I suppose, given that I'm talking to you at 3:30 on a Thursday afternoon from Federation Building. But I thank you for the opportunity to present this, and I'll get going. I'd like to start with the notion of lawyer jokes, because I think that it provides a fair amount of context for where we all find ourselves. And in so much as it creates a lot of the notions about us. So I'll just share a couple with you. What's the difference between a vacuum cleaner and a lawyer riding a motorcycle? The vacuum cleaner has the dirt bag on the inside. An attorney was working late one night in his office when suddenly Satan appeared before him. The devil made him an offer. He said, "I will make it so you win every case that you try for the rest of your life. Your clients will worship you, your colleagues will be in awe, and you'll make enormous amounts of money. But in return, you must give me your soul, your wife's soul, the souls of your children, your parents, grandparents, and those of all your friends." The lawyer thought about it for a moment and then asked, "But what's the catch?" So the issue about lawyer jokes is lawyers don't think they're funny, and no one else thinks they're jokes. These are a few quotes. You hear all these slag comments about lawyers, and these are a few quotes about us, and they're not made by They're not made by bad people. One appears to be made by God or his surrogate. So again, this provides the conceptual background. So you've gone to law school, and now you're practicing law, and it has become very apparent. I think we'd all admit to it in our own experience that we deal with very high levels of stress. More and more people are leaving the practice altogether as a result of it. The challenges of this profession are significant. And depending on the way that you work, the area in which you work, how you're set up in terms of whether you're on your own or in a big firm, maybe the more successful you get, the busier you get. Maybe the more successful you get, the more you can lay off on other people. But generally speaking, it continues to be a stressful profession. So where we find ourselves, this is a little bit dated, but it certainly sets the landscape for us. In 2012, in Ontario, roughly 9% of the calls to the Ontario Lawyers Assistance Program had to do with alcohol dependency. 20 to 25% of legal professionals having alcoholic tendencies. A large study in the US in 2016 showed 1 in 4 were living with depression. 1 in 5 had symptoms of anxiety. 1 in 3 were categorized as problem drinkers. A 2017 study in Toronto found lawyers are more likely to experience depressive symptoms as they gain success in their field, which again is sort of counterintuitive. So with all this as context and prologue, the Barreau in Quebec engaged the Université de Sherbrooke to participate or to run a study. So they spoke, the group at Sherbrooke, which was run by Professor Nathalie Cadieux, who is a researcher and associate professor. She ran a study where the inquiry was done through, originally through the Quebec Bar Assistance Program, but there was a survey that went out after recognition that in fact there were no specific measures. We don't have metrics, particularly in Quebec. It was recognized, but we now know none of us have metrics as to how mental health issues are invasive in our profession. But they did know that there were studies that said we're at greater risk for burnout, anxiety, depression, substance abuse, suicide. So Sherbrooke undertook a study. It was a 2-phase study that ran from 2014-2016, and phase 1, phase 2, 2017-2019. It was a study of 2,700 lawyers in the profession, asking them 150 questions on mental health. The study's results were presented, I think, for the first time at the Federation of Law Societies conference here in St. John's in October of 2019. The study identified mental health indicators, they called it. First, psychological distress, which they described as an alarm signal for preventative action. Burnout, which could be professional, personal, or relational. And well-being, which they tried to create a score for and broke down well-being across a variety of profiles and factors. As to the highlights of the study, regarding psychological distress, they found young lawyers were heavily impacted by or described symptoms of psychological distress. Young men, slightly more so than women. Private sector lawyers, slightly less than public, but particular areas of practice that were more likely to demonstrate signs of psychological distress. Family law, litigation, commercial, corporate business law. I would suggest to you that those of you who practice in those areas are not surprised by that finding. As to burnout, burnout was prevalent among 22% of young lawyers. Women reported at a rate of 20.7%, indications of burnout. In the private sector, was seen at 22.8%. And again, certain areas of law were more inclined toward it: family law, criminal law, and litigation. The litigation, criminal law, family law repetition is not unusual. Those are all very clearly stressful and demanding areas of law. Not that others aren't, but I did a little bit of family law, enough to know that I don't ever want to do it again. And a large part of that was because of the extent to which your lawyer, counselor, therapist, psychologist, it's, you know, there are demands of that particular area of law that you don't experience when you're negotiating royalties contracts. As to how it broke down in terms of well-being, there was more well-being in experienced lawyers, that is, lawyers with greater than 10 years of experience, corporate lawyers, and labor lawyers. I can't tell you why exactly I chose these graphics for everyone. For some reason, I envisioned corporate lawyers as sitting around throwing their money up in the air. I hadn't envisioned labor lawyers as looking like sort of a very happy Justin Trudeau, but here we are. Then in terms of less well-being, young lawyers, and this poor gentleman is a ginger young lawyer as well. The lawyers in firms, which is sort of an oddity, one would think, again, sort of counterintuitive, and litigators and family lawyers. The lawyers in firms, there's a sort of common sense approach, one would think, that you have more people around you and you're more able to sort of air your concerns, to bounce things off people. But at the same time, at least it's been in my experience, there's an awful lot to be gained in not working with someone who has any sort of financial interest in your financial interest or in your work product or anything else. Having worked for the better part of 20 years in private practice before joining government, it's very different. It is interesting to note, though, that there was no, and the study captured no discernible difference between public and private practice lawyers, which differs with my own experience, but the study would suggest that the grass is an equally unimpressive shade of green on both sides. Some highlights pointed out 4 varieties of factors. There were social factors, work-related factors, family factors, and personal factors. I'll just run down through these with you. Some of the social factors included stressors resulting from the regulatory framework of the profession, which you're all too familiar with as we sit on a Law Society-sponsored CLE. The role played by performance-based professional culture. I worked in a firm at one point in my life that at the end of every month, the firm would share with everyone else's billing numbers. That really fosters an organization wherein competition is encouraged. The impact of technology and ICTs. ICTs, it's an acronym for Information Communication Technology, and the key role of training at entrance to the profession. Work-related factors, overexposure to emotional demands, again, something very pervasive in family law and quite often criminal law. The importance of social relationships at work. The high impact of performance requirements, again, the billable hour. The impact of qualitative and quantitative workload on exhaustion. And the predominant role of non-monetary rewards from work, recognition, job security, and career opportunities. Family factors. The work-family conflict, which was very present and important in explaining health. The paradoxical impact of marriage. I found this to be very interesting, and what it examines is that there's an inherent support in being married, in so much as you have someone with whom to share the burden. But at the same time, there goes with it a sense that you, for all the time that you're spending at work, may be letting somebody else down, and that there's a competing obligation. Impact of the social support outside of the workplace, and the impact of children. I actually listened to an audiobook today that talked about the importance of social support and friends, And it said that there were studies done that if you had one friend, they describe them as 4 a.m. friends, someone that you can call at 4 o'clock in the morning and talk about your problems. If you had such a friend in your life, that your longevity would actually be extended. You have a longer lifespan if you have a strong friendship network. And finally, the impact of children. I can speak to that. I have a 24-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 3-year-old. The impact of children is great. When one goes home and says, I've got to get this work done tonight, and someone else wants to watch Peppa Pig, you tend to watch Peppa Pig until it's time for bed, and then you start your work, so you're at it until 1 o'clock in the morning. Personal factors. The importance of coherence, values between those of the individual and their organization and their interaction with performance requirements. Your own personal skills, such as psychological detachment, the ability to cope with stress, self-leadership, the ability to set limits and say no. Age and experience, personality traits, and lifestyle habits. I would like to just jump back briefly, and I'll explore it again later on. With regard to psychological detachment, the skills here, the arrows that you have in your quiver. Psychological detachment is a wonderful skill if you can manage it, and lawyers usually learn this through baptism by fire, that if they can't detach themselves psychologically, it's a much harder road to hoe. The ability to set limits and say no is really a systemic problem. When you're 20 years into your career, it's a little easier to set limits and say no than when you're a lawyer just starting. When you're taking calls from your senior partner and say, no, I'm sorry, I have family over for dinner, I can't deal with that. That's less an option. And I gave this presentation to the Law Society of Newfoundland last month, and there was a question from one of the attendees. What would you say to a young lawyer who wanted to raise these issues with a partner at their firm? And I feel as though I really failed them in my answer, because I couldn't give one. And I think I may have said something kind of trite, like, welcome to practice of law. And I don't know what the answer is, but I've given it more and more thought. And I think that, ultimately it comes to sitting down and having that conversation. And I'll discuss later on the impacts that come from having that sort of conversation. But suffice to say at this point that if people don't start having it, then it's never going to get any easier. So before I leave the Sherbrooke study, I'd like you all to know that at the conclusion of the Federation of Law Societies conference, it became clear to all of the societies in the Federation that this information would be very useful to have on a national basis. So the Federation of Law Societies has engaged Sherbrooke to conduct a nationwide study. It's in its early stages now. The National Steering Committee has just been set. And I'm happy to say I have a spot on that, and we have our first meeting, I want to say next week. But the goal is, in the course of the coming years, perhaps decade, to do a nationwide study and get a much better sense of the mental health and wellness of lawyers in Canada. So I'm going to run through a couple of slides of some of the stressors in the legal profession. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here about a lot of this, but it's also useful to look and see something that you see in that list that's not particularly stressful for you, and recognize that it could very well be for your colleagues. So just to run through them, the burden of responsibility for other people, money, family, freedom, high public expectation of performance and standards, coupled with lower public tolerance or understanding. That's getting back to our lawyer jokes. The increased adversarial nature of practice and of other lawyers. It is disconcerting sometimes to meet young lawyers who have a very, very adversarial nature. I say that in comfort to you folks, less so if I was giving this presentation to the Law Society of Ontario. But I mean, we have, most times when I have this conversation, I say we have a very small bar. You folks also have a pretty small bar. What I used to say when I was doing calls to the bar was that, you know, we're a small bar and it's a long road, and civility goes an awful long way. But it's seeming more and more there are folks who are coming right out of the gate with a very, very adversarial stance. So there's an increased competition among lawyers for clients, the increased complexity of law, taking on work that may be uninteresting or monotonous just to survive. And that goes back to the demands of the billable hour. When you're a young lawyer trying to build up a stable of clients, taking on things that you're really and truly not interested in. And it's okay if you're doing something that bores you, I suppose, in terms of the regulator's perspective, as long as you're not doing something you don't know how to do, because that happens as well. Low decision latitude for junior lawyers can be very frustrating. Isolation from supportive colleagues, taking on work outside of your areas of expertise, which I just alluded to, taking on too much work. No one wants to say no. Putting off difficult tasks. That's something that we're all guilty of. I attended a seminar years ago put off here. I can't remember the chap's name, but he was from California. And he said that he would every 4 weeks or so go through his files and pick out the ones that he called, you know, the real dogs, the ones that he didn't want to deal with. And you know, we all have those. And he'd end the retainer somehow or another. He'd just get rid of them. Here since I've come to the Department of Justice, you know, I've inherited files where somebody has had it and they said, you know what, I haven't been able to give this the attention that it requires, and I can't tell you why. I just can't. Being able to pass it off to a colleague is a fantastic thing sometimes. Excessive work hours. We're, for the most part, all guilty of that. And difficulties achieving work-life balance. Some people have difficulty saying work-life balance. It is a phrase that's sort of frowned upon, and their eyes rolled and whatnot by the older generation, if I may say. But it's a fact. You know, we all need to work and we all need to live. So how do these stressors manifest themselves in the profession, and I suppose amongst anybody? Key ones that I'm going to talk about a little bit are burnout, substance abuse, depression, anxiety, and suicide. So these are what I've seen described as 10 milestones of burnout. So overcommitment, you know, when you're always in motion, you're steadily doing something. If you have inadequate breaks and rest, you know, if you're in continuous client involvement, which again, hand in hand with quite often with family files, sometimes with criminal files, idealistic standards, constant low-grade stress. And I describe this as constant low-grade stress interrupted by, you know, panic-inducing crisis. Lack of help and assistance, particularly relevant for younger lawyers. You know, most associates don't have associates to do work for them. Chronic fatigue from pushing yourself, also known as hitting the wall. Strong sense of responsibility, even when someone else dropped the ball. One of the things that you learn as a lawyer, obviously, over your career is that if you're the one standing before the judge, it's your fault. You can't say that my assistant copied that page upside down, or I gave you the wrong side. Somebody else wrote down the wrong citation. It's you. It's your responsibility. Guilty feelings about missing events and activities. I mean, that's the trying to strike the home life balance or home work life balance. Heavy job and family responsibilities and expectations. And coupled with that, the inability or strong reluctance to say no. So what can we do to combat it? Be mindful, and these are taken from an article written by a lawyer named Jay Reeves. It's called 7 Signs of Lawyer Burnout. He wrote a book called The Most Powerful Attorney in the World. He points out to watch for temper tantrums. Are you getting really angry when you get off the phone with a client and you're sputtering and slamming the phone down, saying, "Why did I take this file on?" That's a good sign. Anxiety attacks. I've spoken to too many lawyers that thought they were having a heart attack because they were having an anxiety attack. I've had it happen where I have no idea what's happening other than it's like it's getting harder to swallow. And I got to a point where I realized what it was. And it wasn't because there was a very apparent stressor, just snuck up. Delegate. This is one of these things that's so important. You say it 3 times. You have to use your teammates. If you have them, use them. I mean, if you try to carry all the weight on your shoulders, then you're not going to be able to carry it very far. Creating boundaries. And this goes sort of hand in hand with learning to say no. If you don't want to get emails and texts at 11 o'clock at night, say so. This is about speaking truth to power, and that's really difficult. When I was a young articling clerk quite some time ago, I remember my principal called me one night. I was watching Saturday Night Live, which in Newfoundland comes on at 1 a.m. on Sunday morning. And my principal called me during that to come to the office. The notion of saying no to him still, I can't even imagine it. It was, yes, sir, on the way. But you can't have a healthy life when you're doing that. Maybe you can when you're 23 or 24, but it's a lot harder when you're 43 or 54. Take time off. Doing something for recreation isn't the same as goofing off. It's a time for you to re-energize and renew. Try not to be concerned about what's going to happen in the office when you're gone. It will continue to operate. We had a lawyer here at our bar pass away quite suddenly about 3 weeks ago or a month ago. And I was talking to his partner yesterday. And you realize that life goes on. I mean, you're not there at your desk anymore, but all those files still need to be done. And your clients still need representation, and it happens. It gets done. All the fires get put out. And that's when someone dies. So surely you can step away from your desk for 2 weeks or turn off your phone for a long weekend. Finally, be alert for physical and emotional cues. That's really just saying, listen to your body. If you're always grumpy, if you've got that sort of general malaise kind of feeling, and you can't describe why you have it, maybe you need to take a break. I'd like to talk briefly about addictions. Our profession has a serious addictions issue. In the United States in 2017, there was a Betty Ford study that found 36.5% of lawyers had scores consistent with problem drinking. And closer to home, studies across our country have pegged the rate of alcoholism in the profession between 15 and 24%, which is to say 1 in 5 lawyers are addicted to alcohol. And after that, this whole thing is sort of depressing. You need to see this presentation to get some tools to deal with the things you learned in this presentation. But that said, I am going to share with you a Simpsons moment, notwithstanding the fact alcoholism is a very, very serious problem. Lionel Hutz is a lawyer that makes everybody feel better.
Claims that she forgot she was carrying that bottle of delicious bourbon, brownest of the brown liquors. So tempting. What's that? You want me to drink you, but I'm in the middle of a trial. Excuse me. Hello, David. I'm really tempted.
Just take it one day at a time and know that I love you.
I love you too, man.
I love me some Lionel Hutz. So it's not just alcohol that we have a problem with. This man, his name is Daryl Singer. He's a commercial litigation lawyer in Toronto. I had the opportunity to hear him speak at the Federation Conference in St. John's, and also had an opportunity about a month ago to have a nice telephone conversation with him. And he found himself in a situation where he was having migraines, and his doctor provided, or prescribed rather, prophylactically OxyContin, and was saying just to take them in advance to ward off the migraines. So of course, I mean, that created an addiction. And he fell fast and didn't notice while it was happening. He talks about, talking to people after he came out of it, and they're saying, that they loaned him $1,000 one day, where he just showed up at their office for no reason and said he really needed it. Says he became a chronic liar. He got in trouble with the Law Society, as one might expect. He wasn't returning clients' phone calls. He wasn't dealing with things. And then when the Law Society came knocking, he wasn't dealing with that either. So he got in a really bad way until he finally found the help that he needed. And ultimately, through a social worker that he met in the Ontario Lawyers Assistance Program, he came to the conclusion that he needed to close his practice, and he did for a year. He received a 30-day suspension from the Law Society because he woefully neglected his clients. But really, he looks back now and says that the Law Society did him a favor in doing that. So when he came back into private practice, he started representing people. I think he's primarily a personal injury lawyer now in Toronto, and is having a great life. But he needed to step away to get ready to come back again. Depression. Depression is like burnout in many ways. People show symptoms of withdrawal and fatigue, but clinical depression is a diagnosis, of course, which differs in many ways from burnout, which is something usually more anecdotal. Some really horrible statistics here. According to an often cited 1990 Johns Hopkins study of more than 100 occupations, researchers found that lawyers led the nation with the highest incidence of depression. In 1991, the ABA Young Lawyers survey indicated 41% of female attorneys were unhappy with their jobs. 7 in 10 lawyers responding to a survey in California said they'd change careers if the opportunity arose. So what do we do with all this depression? Well, first and foremost, talk to somebody. Go to your doctor. Just your GP can give you, go through an inventory with you to see whether or not you're depressed. I have no hesitation in sharing with you that I had, over the course of my career, I had dark times. I had a divorce. I had a firm that went through a breakup after about 9 years, in which I was a partner. And yeah, I didn't ever think I was depressed, but I was sure down. And I reached out to talk to people. I figured there was no harm in doing it. But then subsequently, I had a car accident a couple of years ago and had a concussion. And after the concussion, I started to feel really weird. And I was ultimately diagnosed with severe depressive disorder, and started to get treatment for it, and it made all the difference. So step one is talk to a professional. They'll help you. I can show you PowerPoints, but I can't prescribe you things. And what you can do on your own, set realistic goals, learn to prioritize to the extent that you can. You're not going to start your submissions with, well, good afternoon, Justice. I'm afraid I'm only going to be able to stay for about half an hour because I need to go for a walk. But still, you know, there are ways to integrate prioritization into your practice. Come to grips with mistakes. I mean, they happen. Try to take an inventory of yourself, you know, as often as you can. People involved in mindfulness will say to do it with great regularity over the course of the day. Take your mental health seriously, even if those around you aren't. They're not taking their own seriously. They're not taking yours seriously. Try to find some balance in your life. Try to find healthy outlets for your stress. Keep in mind that what we do is stressful. And that's something that a lot of people, they recognize it. I know even when you're in law school, you like to perpetuate the sort of mythical nature of law school. Oh yeah, we're burning the midnight oil. This is just the hardest thing in the world. But people don't actually realize how hard it is to practice when you get out here and your desk is just piled with stuff. And you sort of need to come to grips with that, or you're never going to be happy doing this. And that's okay too. I'll get to that, but it's all right to be unhappy doing this and just give it the hell up. Play to your strengths, you know, try to stay away from, try to get rid of work that you find you experience personal weakness in, or things that really bring you down. And always remember that it is very professional to ask for help. And I'm not talking in this case about, you know, medical help, but going to a colleague or, you know, a senior partner or someone and saying, like, I can't do this. It's not going to get done. And if no one helps me, we're in trouble. So anxiety, briefly, I'll speak to this. Again, another statistic that's just horrible. 61% of attorneys reporting struggling to manage anxiety at some point in their career. It can manifest itself in various ways: chronic anxiety, worry and tension, obsessive compulsive disorder, panic disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, social anxiety disorder. And then this stuff is no joke. It can really, really take you out of circulation. I picked up this book. I don't know what turned me on to it. It may have been the conference. I can't recall. I'm a big audiobook person because I've got a 35, 40-minute commute. So I try to make sure whenever I'm in the car, I'm listening to a book. And I wasn't a huge fan of the audiobook, but the book itself had a lot of really good tips. It's two lawyers who found some peace through meditation and mindfulness, and they give you some practical steps about how to integrate it into your practice. And these are American lawyers. I think they're based out of California, and I take it, frankly, that their lives are even worse than ours. Suicide. Suicide is a serious problem in our profession. Again, some stats to make you cry. 9th leading cause of death among the general population, but the 3rd leading cause of death for lawyers. And that's in Canada last year. I mean, that's horrible. And in the States, lawyers overtook dentists as the profession with the highest rate of suicide. I have no idea what gave rise to dentists wanting to kill themselves, but apparently it's a stressful profession. We have had a number of suicides at our bar over the last 10 years. And again, like you, small bar. So it's not quite everyone knows everyone, but we can't manage 6 degrees of separation. I mean, you might get 2. And suicides hit very hard amongst the profession. And everyone gets very focused on well-being and mental health for about an hour or until the funeral's over. And then we go back, just jump back on the wheel again. So it is crucially important to keep to keep aware of things to look for regarding suicide. If you hear colleagues or friends or loved ones threatening to hurt themselves, looking for ways to hurt themselves, expressing feelings of hopelessness, rage, anger, revenge, being reckless, talking about being trapped, increasing addictions issues, anxiousness, agitation, insomnia, dramatic mood changes, people talking about, or you yourself experiencing any of these things. And, you know, for instance, saying there's no reason to live or having no sense of purpose. Be careful if you feel like that. And this is something that, you know, this is something that flows from a self-assessment, asking yourself these questions very seriously, and listening to people when they talk. Sometimes you can, I hesitate to say sometimes you can pick this stuff up. Sometimes you can. I was in a situation when I was at the Law Society that I ended up, myself and the president at the time ended up sitting down with a practitioner for half a day, where they had, you know, said they were feeling like the world would be better off without them and their family would be better off without them. So there are times when it slaps you in the face and you have to deal with it, but there are other times when it doesn't. My good friend in law school killed himself in the summer between first and second year, and he had called me the night before he did, and I wasn't home, so obviously didn't get to talk to him. And for years, thought about, you know, well, maybe if I talked to him and maybe I would have said something that would have fixed it. I wouldn't have, but still, you do at least after an experience like that, tune in to really listening when you're talking with someone. So how can you help? You know, again, first and foremost, try to get professional help. I mean, we are not trained to do this. But when you do find yourself in that conversation, be direct, you know, talk openly, matter-of-factly about suicide, be willing to listen, allow them to express their feelings and accept those feelings, and don't be judgmental. Don't talk about whether or not suicide is right or wrong. Don't lecture people on the value of life. Get involved with the person if you can, become available to them, show interest and support for them. For the love of God, don't dare them to do it. This isn't, you know, a 7-year-old who's threatening to throw his broccoli on the floor. Don't act shocked. All you're going to do, very likely, there is put some distance between you. Refuse to be sworn to secrecy. Get help for someone. Try to offer alternatives that are available, but don't, there's no other better way to say it, don't offer glib reassurance. Don't tell people that everything's going to be all right, because they're at a point where they're talking about killing themselves. They do not believe everything is going to be all right. And I don't know why I keep this note at the end. It should be at the beginning. Get help from professionals. So it's all doom and gloom. We're all working in a horrible pit of despair. So what can we do about it? Here are a few tips. Rest, relax, recreate, renew. It's the only way you're going to get through this in the long haul. Give up something. Don't keep adding floors on. You've already got a big pile of work that you need to do. Learn to say no. Do that within reason. I mean, it's obviously it's an exercise of degrees. You know, it's going to be very difficult on the first day on the job to say, listen, I'm sorry, but I have to be out of here at 4, and I'm never going to be here past 4. But, you know, you certainly need to be able to have these sorts of conversations if your well-being relies on it. Set priorities and consult with your family when you're doing that. I mean, your family is always going to understand, I think. But certainly, if you can't say that with any certainty, your family should always at least be a part of the conversation, so they know, yeah, sort of glib to say they're always going to understand, but they should always at the very least be a part of the conversation so they know your rationale for the decisions that you're making. Get away from it if you can. That'd be great. Not everybody can. Listen to your body. Don't wait until it's too late. Again, some of these are kind of glib. Cut out the hurry and worry. But two that I think are very important are consider changing jobs and consider changing careers. I have changed jobs as a lawyer several times, as you'll recall from Glenn's introduction, over the course of my career, and it just never ever struck me that this had to be a cradle to grave scenario. I just figured that we could, move around till you found something that fit, and I did. And now I'm in a place where I really enjoy the work. I really enjoy the people. But something that you should never rule out is changing careers. It's, you know what, I mean, there's an allure to being a lawyer. Maybe people think something of it, but if it's not for you, give it up. I mean, if you're not happy, find something that does make you happy. And don't worry about people saying, oh, you couldn't cut it. There's this nonsensical thing that lawyers do. They do it. I hear it here when you move from private practice to government, for instance. Oh, you couldn't cut it in private practice, so you had to move. Or, oh, they couldn't cut it as a lawyer. I think that's changing more and more. People are leaving the practice of law to find things that they enjoy. But I think still not enough are, and I believe there are folks that go from the beginning of their career to retirement without really having dug it. So one of the practical things to get involved in, and this is something of I don't want to say trend because it's been around for a couple thousand years as far as I can tell, but it's become very popular over the course of the last few, as mindfulness. So the screen shows you what mindfulness is if you don't know already. The guy on the top there, he's a Theravada monk, and that's what mindfulness is to me. That's when, if somebody ever put that to me, meditation, mindfulness, I saw that. The fellow on the bottom, holding his chin, is Professor Thomas Telfer from Western Law School. In this picture, it's 2017, and he's leading first-year students through a program called the Mindfulness Ambassador Program. And he teaches students how to use mindfulness in the practice of law. It started as this program for first years. It has turned into a 4-credit class for upper level students. There's a waiting list. It fills up immediately. And it's started to spread to other universities. The University of Ottawa and Dalhousie, I think, have introduced a mindfulness course, but they're only for first year students. Western, I believe, still is the only one that has it for upper year students. And Professor Telfer, so he has a BA, JD, LLM, and SJD, published a number of articles on insolvency law, secure transactions, consumer law, major interest in the intersection of history and bankruptcy law, and is the author of Ruin and Redemption, A Struggle for Canadian Bankruptcy Law, 1867 to 1919. So obviously, just the guy you go to talk about mindfulness and meditation. It seems, again, counterintuitive, but he himself had a run-in where he was suffering from depression, and through that survived a suicide attempt, but he ended up hospitalized and was introduced to the practice of mindfulness through that. And he has developed this and spoken about it to lawyers around the world, to law students around the world. He spoke here in 2019, and I'll just share with you, I think maybe some people on the call were there, but when he spoke to this room full of law society staff and elected members or elected officials, he led everyone through a guided meditation. And it was, the whole 9 yards. He had like a chime, wanted everybody to close their eyes. And you could see like a sense of discomfort come across the room. Like I remember just so happened to be looking at one of the presidents of one of the larger law societies as it happened, and you know, oh, the eye roll. And it makes it, when you see something like that, it makes it so understandable that people are hesitant to want to do something, you know, in their firm with their colleagues about something like mindfulness, because there is still this ingrained, and perhaps I'm being unfair, but I think it's ingrained mostly in lawyers of a certain generation, of an older generation, perhaps, that this is just all in the Lego movie that my son watches all the time. Somebody says hippy dippy baloney. And that's what has always come to my mind when I think of people rolling their eyes at this. But it explains why, you know, there are, I spoke to a lawyer, or heard one speak, that said in their firm, they had put in a yoga room, a mindfulness room, but nobody used it, because not because no one wanted to, but nobody wanted to be the first person to do it. So, you know, so why is that? And it's largely because no one wants to talk about it. So why doesn't anyone want to talk about this? These are some responses in a study. Now, this was a survey of men, so it might not be representative. For instance, there are some things here that I think only men would say, or men would be more prone to say, being the big dumb jerks that we do tend to be. So, you know, the big one here is I've learned to deal with it. I don't wish to be a burden to anyone. I'm too embarrassed. There's a negative stigma around this type of thing. I don't want to admit I need support. I don't want to appear weak. I have no one to talk to. I don't want to appear weak, I would suggest, is a lot higher than 16%. There is a real perception that if you say that you have a mental health issue, that if you're not weak, then you are somehow deficient. And that is something that we need to destroy if people are going to be able to get the help that we all need. So what can we do to reduce the stigma, which is what it is? You know, it can have a really devastating impact. Careers can be permanently negatively affected if you disclose a mental health or addiction issue, or they have been certainly in the past, and I'm sure there remains concern that if you disclose an issue like that, it's going to be a problem for you. Sometimes, as we saw with Daryl Singer, you can't meet your professional responsibilities because you haven't addressed these issues. So to reduce the stigma, try to create a good organizational culture, maintain respectful workplaces, trying to educate the leadership to the extent that you can is a great thing. Encourage open dialogue about mental health and addictions issues goes a long way. My department here has bought into this in a big way, and when you get buy-in from the leadership, it certainly helps. Things like this. Justice Gascon, most everyone knows about the day back in, I think it was May 2019, where he sort of disappeared, and there was a police bulletin put out looking for him. And ultimately what it was is he had had a change of medication and suffered an anxiety attack and ended up in a hospital. But he has subsequently, he came out right on the tail end of that and said that he'd had issues all his life, mental health issues. And he said after he did that, he heard from hundreds of people. And, you know, a lot of lawyers and judges said that they were really glad to see someone at the top of their profession saying that they had an illness like this. And again, we think in our profession that it's, you know, at least 3 times higher than it is in other professions, yet nobody is saying that they have it. So when Justice Gascon came out, there was this sort of groundswell, I think, of not everybody, but a lot of folks found like this was enough to be able to say, yeah, I have problems. I'd like to get some help. And I know when he did it, I sent out a note to the bar here, and I heard back from was going to say a ton, but I prone to hyperbole. I heard back from a number of lawyers who said, yeah, you know what, I've had a rough time too. And I'm glad to be able to say it. And since I gave this presentation last time, first here at Justice and then at the Law Society of Newfoundland and Labrador, just getting contacted by people. And that goes a long way. If there's somebody who can have a chat with you, if they feel a little bit more comfortable, then, you know, this is something we should really all buy into. A Supreme Court of Canada justice saying that he has a mental health issue should inspire everyone in our practice to say, look, there's no shame in saying this. And I encourage anyone who does have a problem they want to talk about it. You don't need to give an interview to Lawyers Weekly, but you should be able to have a conversation with a colleague without being worried about it. And Justice Gascon has been praised as being very brave, and so he is, because this was very much a pioneering step. But really and truly, I mean, we shouldn't be calling this bravery. We shouldn't have to call this bravery, because would you consider it brave to go into work and say, oh, geez, I had to get my appendix out, or, oh, I have cancer, or, oh, I have, you know, any sort of medical condition. Those things we all find to be fine to disclose to our colleagues, but mental health issues less so, and that's something I can't quite get my head around. The next slide I'm going to show you is Daryl Singer, who I introduced you to before, and this is him having a very brief, or snippets from a very brief chat that he gave to the Rotary Club in Toronto.
So what I've learned, 3 major lessons. One, I've already touched on, which is, if this is you, seek help. And if it's somebody you know, please encourage them to seek help and be there for them. 2 other lessons now that have put me in the situation where I live a contented and happy life at home and at my work are very simple. 2 very, very important lessons. 1, lose the ego. And 2, lose the envy. When I think back to the amount of time that I spent trying to obtain things because somebody else had them, or because I thought, as a lawyer, I'm supposed to have them, right? We all live in a world of supposed to. I'm supposed to live in this neighborhood. I'm supposed to be strong. I'm not supposed to ask for help. I'm supposed to have a fancy car. And it's allowed me to simply focus on my children and my life and my job, and do my job more effectively and with more joy and passion than I have ever done it before. And the reality is, when you do that, ultimately the money does follow, and you can have nice things, but now I have them for the right reason, because I want them, not because Carl has it, so I have to get the same thing.
So, for you, ask for help. If you need help, ask for it. This information I took from your website. This is your Lawyer and Family Assistance Program. If they're anything like ours, you get in touch with someone, you're put in almost immediate contact with a professional who can help you confidentially. And you know, like I said, I've made that call, and I'm glad I did. I include this slide because peer support is something that some law societies have networks already created for peer support. We don't, and I don't know that you do. So this was something that I was mulling over for a good period of time while I was involved in the Law Society, but wanted to get removed from it before I went any further with it. So I've started a program here called Compos Mentis, and it's building a peer support network for lawyers here in the province. And it's peer support in so much as we want to be able to have a group for addictions issues. We want to be able to have a group for people a support group for sitting around talking about parenting, a group for people who have financial issues. So this is in the process of being established. got a logo. Yay. That's got that far. And after I gave this presentation to our local law society, which was the first time I disclosed this, I heard from a number of people who are interested in getting involved. So I urge you, if you'd like to do something like that, please do it. And contact me. I will share whatever resources I can find with you. I see that we have a question. So, does Don think that living through the pandemic and the additional stress it has brought to everyone's had an impact on mental health of lawyers in particular? I suppose the impact of the pandemic varies from person to person. It seems to me the additional stress it brings would have a negative impact on those who are already dealing with mental health issues. Just wondering if Don has seen any evidence of this in the legal profession in particular. Yes, I absolutely have, and it's funny because I've seen both ends of it. I have spoken to people, and they suffered very much for, well, some people for a variety of reasons. Some people, for instance, who had, criminal practices that I know here in the city, where their business really dried up because courts weren't sitting. So nothing was happening. All the appearances they had lined up for months to come weren't happening. And that additional financial strain weighs on you. I had other people who were just saying, I still have, I'm working at home. I'm at the dining room table, and I've still got the kids, and I've still got to get dinner, and I've still got to this, and this. Really the pandemic for some people was there's no daycare anymore. So they had to parent and practice law, which is very, very difficult. Oddly enough, I had a positive experience largely through this, because I was dealing with cognitive symptoms as a result of the concussion that I had. And I had been advised to, like take breaks every half an hour and that sort of thing, and things that I couldn't work into my workday. So when I was working at home, I was far better able to do that. And that period of time at home where you could really, I think all of us probably experienced it, where you get up at 6:30 or whatever, you might check your email, and it turns out you've answered a couple of them by 7:30. So, maybe you just go out for an hour and work around the house or whatever. It wasn't that sort of structured 9 to 5 or 8 till 10, whatever people do. So for me, it was actually kind of helpful. But certainly, yeah, it struck different people in different ways. And one of the real threads I found for a lot was trying to balance that additional family obligation of actually being there and still giving what you needed to work. This chance would have it, I ended up arguing a Court of Appeal matter from my bedroom, and sitting there in my suit and a pair of flip-flops, and it was, so the practical part of that was, over the course of the pandemic, I never had a video conference that my 7-year-old didn't photobomb. He got in everything I ever did. So we figured that probably wasn't good for the Court of Appeal. The province's Chief Justice probably would not have appreciated it. Maybe they would have. But my wife, who also worked full-time, had to take that day and just pack the kids up and go for a drive somewhere so I could have some quiet in the house. So yeah, sorry, long answer, but this has been a very stressful time for a lot of people. This is my end slide. I don't put up a thank you, do you have any questions? But rather, I just wanted to leave some positivity, I hope, with everyone, because this is a hard topic, and it's harder now on the front end. As strange as it may be, it's 2020, and a lot of people are having these conversations for the first time. But which is particularly why I like that quote on the left from Winston Churchill: "And now is not the end, is not even the beginning of the end, but is perhaps the end of the beginning." So I'm very hopeful that, not my presentation, but generally a movement, that law societies are even having these sorts of conversations, for instance, and providing this sort of professional development, that we're considering well-being professional development is a big step forward. So if we can sort of take this momentum and push through, that'd be great. So that concludes my presentation, such as it is. any questions that you have, that you haven't asked, or if it comes to you later, send me an email. Glenn can give you my contact information. I apologize if this seems kind of strange, but giving a presentation to just a camera is weird. So you do tend to run on. But I thank you for your attention and wish you all a very good day.
Thanks very much, Don.
My pleasure.
And it was great to hear that the issues that you have on the East Coast are not much different than the issues that we find ourselves having on the North Coast. And I think you've left all of us with a number of things to think about. And your just talk about it, just say something, I think is something that we can all live with.
Yeah.
All right.
One more thing that I would add is, when you are talking about it, when you are sharing things with your friends, never compare your insides to someone else's outsides, because it's very easy to say, my friends aren't going to understand this because they're not going through what I'm going through. But you have no notion what they're going through. So by all means, do talk to your friends. But anyway, thank you, Glenn. I appreciate this opportunity, and I hope to talk to any of you who wish to in the future.
Thank you, Don, and thank you everyone for participating. Have a good afternoon, everyone.